Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into something I think we all struggle with, at least a little bit. Emotional triggers. Those moments when, well, you kind of lose it.
Like you're 9 years old again, even though you really, really aren't.
Yeah, exactly. And to help us navigate this tricky terrain, we're turning to a book that's been making waves, Triggers by David Richo. It's this really cool blend of psychology and spirituality.
And what I love about Richo's approach is he doesn't see triggers as these things to avoid, but more like signposts. Like they're trying to show us something important about ourselves.
So it's less about, oh no, I'm triggered, and more about, okay, what can I learn from this? But before we go there, maybe we should start with, like, what exactly are triggers? I mean, we all get annoyed sometimes. Is that the same thing?
It's similar, but
Uh-huh.
triggers are more intense. It's those times when your emotional reaction is like way out of proportion to what's actually happening, like a tidal wave of anger or fear or anxiety.
Okay, so it's like getting totally flooded by the emotion. And Richo says those reactions are actually rooted in our past, especially stuff we haven't really dealt with.
Yeah, he uses this powerful phrase, undeclared burdens. It could be hurts from childhood or maybe even big life events later on that we haven't fully processed.
So it's like we're carrying around this baggage without even realizing it. And then certain situations just press on that baggage, triggering all those old feelings.
Right. And to really understand this, he breaks these burdens down into 5 categories. He calls them the 5 A's of undisclosed burdens.
Ooh, 5 A's. Lay 'em on us.
All right, so it's about whether we received enough of these things in key relationships, especially growing up. Acknowledgement, apology, appreciation, affection, or attention.
Okay, just hearing those words, I'm already like, ooh, yeah, I felt that one.
That's how powerful it is. We all have these to some degree. Like, let's say someone was constantly criticized as a kid, never really given genuine appreciation. Now, as an adult, even constructive feedback might trigger them intensely.
Because it's tapping into that old wound of not feeling good enough.
Exactly. Or think about someone who really craved affection but didn't get it. Years later, their partner working late might trigger those abandonment fears from childhood.
So it's those early experiences create these emotional grooves, and we just fall into them, even if the situation doesn't really call for it.
It's amazing how much those early patterns shape us.
Okay, so now that we're starting to see how this works, how do we actually figure out our own personal triggers? I'm guessing this is where mindfulness comes in.
Mindfulness is huge E here. It's about stepping back and observing your emotions, almost like a scientist. When you have a strong reaction, don't just reacty. Pause. Get curious.
So instead of being in the emotion, we try to step outside of it.
Exactly. Ask yourself,
Hmm.
what just happened before I felt this way? What thoughts were going through my mind? What's happening in my body right now?
It's like we become detectives of our own inner world.
I love that analogy.
Hmm.
And to really make progress with this detective work, journaling is so helpful. Even if it's just a few words, like, got triggered when my boss said X.
Yeah, you start to see those patterns.
And sometimes talking to someone you trust can be huge. A therapist, a close friend, anyone who's a good listener. Sometimes an outside perspective helps us see things we miss.
Right, because when we're in the thick of it, it's hard to be objective. But what I really appreciate about this whole approach is it's not about blaming our past or feeling like a victim.
It's more about understanding those roots so we can actually start to heal. And that's where things get really powerful. Because once you understand the why behind your reactions, you can actually change them.
So we're not just identifying triggers to feel bad about ourselves, but to actually free ourselves from them.
Yes, it's about empowerment, not just analysis.
That's amazing. Okay, so we've started to unpack these undeclared burdens. We're getting better at spotting our triggers. But what about in the heat of the moment? What do we actually DO when those emotions are surging?
Ah, that's where the real work begins shifting from reaction to conscious action. And for that, we need to talk about something called emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence. Okay, I've heard that term before, but what does it actually mean? Like, how does it help us with these trigger situations?
Well, think of it like this. You're not just having emotions, you're understanding them, both in yourself and in other people.
Oh, so it's about awareness, like
Yeah.
being aware of what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, and how it's affecting your actions.
Yes. And that awareness gives you more choice. It's not about ignoring or suppressing feelings, but becoming more skillful with them.
Got it. So it's like building that mindfulness muscle we were talking about earlier. Are there like practical ways to do this? What can we start doing today?
Those self-check-ins we talked about, keep doing those. Several times a day, just pause, take a breath, and notice. What emotions are present right now? What thoughts are connected to them?
So it's like taking those little mental notes, but more intentionally.
Exactly. And journaling helps take it even deeper. Even a quick sentence like, felt triggered when my coworker did X, and it made me feel abandoned, like when, connecting it back to the past.
That reminds me of something Richo talks about, shadow work. I was kind of intimidated by that concept at first, but it actually makes a lot of sense here.
It's a perfect fit. Shadow work, it comes from Jungian psychology, and it's basically about bringing those unconscious patterns into the light. And our triggers, they're often connected to those shadow parts of ourselves.
So, like with the coworker thing, maybe it's not really about them being inconsiderate. Maybe it's about my childhood fear of being overlooked, which is now like a shadow part of me.
Exactly. And by recognizing that shadow, we can start to heal it. And this is where emotional intelligence expands. It's not just about our feelings, but learning to empathize with others too.
Oh man, that's tough when you're already feeling triggered. It's like my emotions are so loud, how can I even hear anyone else's?
It definitely takes practice, but even small steps make a difference, like just acknowledging the other person's feelings. Sounds like you're feeling frustrated too. Something like that.
So creating space for understanding, even when things are tense. And I guess this all ties into having healthy coping mechanisms, right? Things we can actually do to manage those big feelings.
For sure. Exercise is great. Creative outlets, spending time in nature, even just talking to someone supportive. These things can be huge.
And Richo talks about finding activities that fill the holes left by those 5 A's we talked about. So like if I lacked affection growing up, maybe spending quality time with loved ones now can help.
That's such a great connection. And it's about self-compassion too. We're going to mess up sometimes. We're going to react badly. We're human.
Okay, good. I was starting to feel like I had to be perfect at this to make it work.
No, it's about progress, not perfection. Forgive yourself for those slip-ups. That's part of emotional intelligence too, recognizing that we're all works in progress.
Okay, this is all really resonating with me, but I have to admit, sometimes even when I'm aware I'm triggered, all I want to do is react. Like just let those emotions take over. How do we bridge that gap?
That's a great question. And that space between awareness and action, that's where the real choice happens. Richo talks about taking responsibility for our reactions, even if they're rooted in our past.
So instead of blaming others or saying, well, that's just how I am, it's about saying, okay, I feel this way, but what can I do differently this time?
Yes, that's the shift. It's not about denying the emotion, but choosing our response to it. Yeah, and that's really empowering. It moves us from feeling like a victim to feeling like we actually have some control.
Wow, that makes so much sense. Okay, but it can't just be all on us, right? I mean, our relationships have to play a role in this too, don't they?
You're so right. And that's what we need to talk about next, the power of supportive relationships, because they can truly make or break this whole journey.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground with emotional triggers. We've gone from feeling totally hijacked by them to like understanding where they come from. And we've even learned some pretty cool tools to manage those really intense moments.
Yeah, we've learned about those undeclared burdens from our past and those practical tools like mindfulness and emotional intelligence. But now I think it's time to zoom out a little. What's the ultimate potential of all this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. It feels like it's got to be about more than just, not yelling at our coworkers anymore.
You're so right. It goes much deeper.
Right.
Richo believes that triggers, they're not the enemy. They're actually like messengers guiding us towards wholeness.
Okay, that's a pretty radical shift. How do we go from seeing them as these like scary threats to opportunities for something good?
It starts with acceptance. Triggers, they're a natural part of being human. We all have them. So instead of resisting them, what if we got curious about them?
So instead of, ugh, not this again, it's more like, what's this trigger trying to show me about myself?
Exactly. And when we do that, we stop seeing them as personal attacks and we start seeing them as chances to, learn and grow. It's like they're pointing us towards the parts of ourselves that still need healing.
Okay, I'm getting that. But can you give us like an example of what that looks like in real life?
Sure. Let's say they always get triggered when they feel left out. So instead of, spiraling into anger or withdrawing, they can take a moment to explore those feelings. Maybe they were neglected as a child and those old wounds are resurfacing.
Ah, so it's like the past is casting a shadow on the present moment.
Yeah. And by bringing those shadows into the light, we can start to heal them.
And as we do that, we become less reactive, less easily triggered. But it's even more than that, right? It's like we start to understand ourselves on a deeper level.
Absolutely. We begin to see the threads that connect our past and present, and we get to choose how we want to respond, We become more intentional in our relationships and how we, move through the world.
It's like we're finally writing our own story instead of letting the past write it for us.
I love that. And here's the really cool part. As we become more self-aware, we also become more empathetic toward others.
Because we realize that everyone's carrying around their own triggers, their own past hurts.
Exactly. And that understanding creates more compassion and connection. We can see each other's triggers not as attacks, but as expressions of, deeper pain or unmet needs.
It's like we're all in this together trying to figure things out.
And that shared humanity can be incredibly healing, both for ourselves and our relationships.
So working with triggers, it's not just about personal growth, it's also about creating a more compassionate world.
That's what I believe. It's a shift from judgment and reaction to empathy and connection.
That's such a beautiful goal. But let's be real, it's not always easy to stay compassionate, especially in those really heated moments. Any tips for navigating those really tough situations?
Well, first, remember to be kind to yourself. It's okay to feel those big feelings. Don't beat yourself up for having them.
Self-compassion, that's so important. We need to treat ourselves like we treat a good friend who is struggling.
And remember, those feelings, they're temporary. The storm will pass. And in the meantime, you've got those mindfulness tools, the breathing, the body scan, grounding yourself in the present moment.
They really do help. And, if it's all just too much, don't hesitate to reach out for support. A therapist, a good friend, anyone who can listen with a compassionate heart.
You're so right. You don't have to go through this alone.
Well, we've covered so much in this deep dive. Triggers, past wounds, mindfulness, self-compassion, supportive relationships. It's a lot to take in. What are some of the key takeaways you hope listeners will remember?
I hope they remember that triggers, while challenging, are not the enemy. They're actually invitations to grow and heal.
It's about moving from fear and reactivity to curiosity and compassion.
That's beautifully put. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. We all have triggers. We all struggle with these intense emotions. So reach out for support when you need it.
And maybe most importantly, be kind to yourself. This is a process, not a destination. Progress over perfection, right?
Yes. And remember, every step you take toward understanding and managing your triggers, it ripples outward. It touches not just your life, but the lives of those around you.
That's such a beautiful thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into emotional triggers. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and tools to navigate your own emotional landscape with more awareness and compassion. Until next time.